Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tamara Aberle. I am the new Program and Membership Lead of the British-German Association, having replaced Antonia Wunderlich at the end of July. And on behalf of the British-German Association, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this online event. So if you are joining us for the first time today, the British-German Association is a charity and membership organization that promotes mutual understanding and good relations between the UK and Germany. And part of what we do is to provide a vibrant forum for debates, talks, discussions, learning about Germany and German-British relations, which means we regularly put on events such as this one. And we also have other initiatives. We have a monthly newsletter and also a variety of in-person events, some of which are coming up this month. This afternoon, we are delighted to welcome Dr. Ulrike Franke and Dr. Henning Hoff to a conversation about Germany's new, or well, fairly new national security strategy. Dr. Ulrike Franke is a senior policy fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. She leads the Technology and European Power Initiative. Her areas of focus include German and European security and defense, the future of warfare, and the impact of new technologies such as drones and artificial intelligence on geopolitics and warfare. Dr. Henning Hoff is executive editor of International Politics Quarterly and editor-at-large of International Politics. He studied international history in Cologne and London and worked as a foreign correspondent in the British capital for nearly a decade after receiving his doctorate. In 2011, he joined International Politics and its publisher, the German Council on Foreign Relations. And since 2014, he has also been responsible for the IP's international edition, the Internationale Politik Quarterly. So before handing over to our speakers, I want to give a quick note on the technology. If you have any questions throughout the event, please submit them via the Q&A function. You should be able to find this at the bottom of your Zoom screen. There is a button saying Q&A. So if you click there, you can start typing up and sending in questions. And you also have the option to like someone else's question, which then means that maybe this question is chosen by our moderator. Yeah, that's all from my side. Now I hand over to our speakers. Please enjoy this discussion.
Thank you very much, Tamara, for this introduction, and lovely to be with you. I do consider myself a little bit of an honorary Brit, having lived in London for over a decade. I very recently moved back to the continent and to Paris. But nevertheless, yeah, honorary Brit, even though Brexit kept me from actually getting the citizenship. So I'm really glad to be with you and to talk about, Germany's national security strategy, which I'm sure you're aware is the very first national security strategy that Germany has put out, or the Federal Republic has put out. Now, I kind of feel like there's a little bit too much being made of this fact, given that, we had white books and we had other kind of documents that try to lay out some kind of strategic visions for Germany, but nevertheless, this is still important, and of course, it is a really important moment. The thing is, this strategy is not a response to the Zeitenwende, so the invasion of Ukraine by Russia or anything that followed. The national security strategy was already announced in the coalition agreement of the new government, which came together before the 24th of February 2022, but nevertheless, there is, of course, it is colored, if you like, by the Russian aggression. But I thought, I wanted to take a few moments to share with you, I guess, four main observations regarding this strategy, regarding its content and the kind of focuses it lays out, and then depending on the time, I'll point out two more things, but maybe we can also do this in the Q&A. But just kind of four observation things that really struck me and that I think are worth exploring. So the first thing that's really crucial to note with regard to this strategy is that security in this national security strategy is defined really in the most inclusive way. So when you look at when you look at the strategy, I did print out the quote. So it says in the strategy, in the 21st century, security means making sure our heating works in the winter. Security means being able to find medication for our children, our pharmacies, having smartphones that work because supplies of the necessary microchips are available, getting to work safely because our trains are not paralyzed by cyber attacks. That's taken from the introduction written by Annalena Baerbock. And in fact, she kind of doubled down in this direction during the press conference where she, together with other ministers, presented the strategy and said, it is part of security whether you're able to take a warm shower in the morning. That approach was a little bit ridiculed by some commentators, because of course it kind of means that, anything and everything seems to become security relevant. And this is something that can be a little bit dangerous. For those of you who may have kind of a background in the academic discussion of international relations, you would be familiar with the kind of secularization approach, which kind of criticizes this very inclusive approach to security, because it sees a danger that if everything is security, nothing is security. And also, if you securitize everything, you tend to want to find kind of security solutions to security problems, which is often military solutions to problems that may not require those. However, I have basically decided to see this in a more positive light, so to see this approach of the German security strategy in a more positive light. And the reason for that is basically Germany, in my view, over the last years and decades, did not define security and kind of geopolitics broadly enough. Namely, we were the country which for years kind of claimed that a project like Nord Stream 2 was a business project, an economic project, has nothing to do with geopolitics, has nothing to do with security. Why are you even thinking about this? This is an economic project. And this is clearly, this was clearly wrong and is clearly wrong. And so taking on this kind of larger approach and saying, we're going to now consider other things, and we're going to realize that things are linked to each other, and things that don't immediately jump out to you as kind of security and defense related actually are relevant in this field. I think that hopefully may be a good thing for the German discussion. The one thing I worry about in this regard is that it could also be once again a kind of loophole to not actually fund and look into the hard security side of things, because you kind of get bogged down by everything else, and everything becomes security. And so the kind of hard security, the Bundeswehr, etc., you don't really fund, you don't have money for, you don't really care about, which is basically what we did for the last decades. But nevertheless, so first observation, security is defined in the most inclusive and broadest way in this strategy. And although, again, one needs to be careful with not going too large, so it becomes kind of irrelevant, I think overall for the German case, that may be a good way to go. That was the first point. The second point I wanted to make, and I kind of try to shape my points a little bit in a way that's particularly interested to a kind of British or public leaning, interested in kind of British issues. And so the second thing I wanted to point out is that, having read the strategy several times and having talked actually to some of those involved in drafting it, I increasingly get the impression that Germany, in this strategy and also in the kind of political decision ever since, is increasingly putting its faith in NATO rather than the European Union when it comes to security and defense. Now, of course, this isn't, clearly spelled out. They don't say, we've decided to go with NATO rather than with the EU defense efforts. In fact, the section on Germany's view of European defense is actually quite well put and well phrased. So I'll read you a short quote. It says, "The federal government wants to further strengthen the European pillar of the transatlantic defense community. The more our European allies contribute militarily and politically to NATO, the more solid the transatlantic alliance will be. Europe's ability to act on its own is increasingly a prerequisite for German and European security. This ability to act entails modern, capable armed forces in the EU member states, as well as a high-performance and internationally competitive European security and defense industry that creates the foundations for our armed forces military capabilities. I think that sounds good. That's kind of, it's a good approach. But when you look into it, and again, when you kind of go a little bit further, I think ever since the beginning of the war, there has been a bit of a shock of realism in Berlin. And there has been a realization that for all the efforts that we've seen at the European Union level on security and defense, it's not really quite delivering yet, for various reasons, including, some of them you can blame on Germany. While NATO, and especially the US, really has been the backbone of the kind of response to the war in Ukraine. And of course, NATO isn't involved in the war in Ukraine, but, the US and the kind of transatlantic element has, as I said, been the backbone of the reaction. And so there is a little bit of this tone that says, yes, European defense is all nice and well, and we continue to support it. But for now, right now, what we need is something that works, and that is, the US and NATO. And the same is true, by the way, when it comes to kind of industry and weapons procurement. There's always this kind of nod to saying like, yes, we should be doing more at the European level, and we would love to, but actually we need something now, and so we're going to buy American. We're gonna go down that route. That, of course, is something that doesn't go down particularly well in places such as where I am at the moment in Paris. But yeah, so another kind of thing that points in this direction is also the fact that the whole concept of European sovereignty and European autonomy or European strategic autonomy aren't mentioned in this document. And that actually surprised me. Not the European strategic autonomy part of it, because the Germans never really liked the autonomy phrasing because it sounded too much like wanting to get rid of the United States, although it wasn't really meant that way, but anyway. But European sovereignty was the term that Germany and indeed this government had in fact adopted. And the term European sovereignty was mentioned in the coalition agreement, by the way, but it doesn't appear in the national security strategy. There are 2 or 3 nods to kind of like digital sovereignty, and I think, but the term of European sovereignty has been dropped, and I think that was deliberate. That that's not an oversight. You don't just forget to do that. I think that's an oversight. Sorry, that is not an oversight. That is a deliberate choice. So I think we've seen this kind of little bit realist shock. Germany puts its faith more into NATO than into the European Union defense efforts. While I think to some extent that is understandable, and I'm a big supporter of NATO and certainly don't want to get rid of it, I also think Germany in particular has painted itself a little bit into a corner here, because I think we are among those to blame a little bit for the fact that EU defense efforts haven't amounted to as much as you wanted it to. And now you kind of say, well, it doesn't work, and so therefore we're not going to do it. Why am I saying that Germany is a little bit to blame for this European failing in a way? I always get the impression that when the Germans talk about European common defense, they very much emphasize the European common part and not so much the defense part. So especially in the last few years where the EU was doing more in this realm, Germany was, supporting this as a means of bringing the European Union countries closer together. But it felt very not random, but it didn't really matter what the issue was. It was more about bringing the Europeans together, and if it was on kind of defense and security, great, but if it wasn't something else, they also would have gone for something else. So I never felt that Germany was very much focused on actual results and actual deliverables, while the French, when they look at European common defense, were very much focused on the defense part and not so much on the common European, and said, we just want to make this work, and if not everyone is on board, we just do it with those who want to do it. So yeah, I think Germany is to some extent, certainly not the only country, but to some extent to be blamed for that as well. And now it's basically saying it's not quite working, so we're gonna put our faith into NATO. That, of course, may be good news for the Brits. That's for you to decide. Third observation, I gave it the title in my notes. Where's the money? ? Nowhere. So. the strategy, in my view, has one major flaw, and that's that it sets out all these things that Germany kind of wants to do and is looking at and are important. And by the way, priorities aren't great here either. It's very much a long list of everything that should be done. But it doesn't actually put any extra money or any money behind those issues and says, how are we gonna address this? And in fact, there are kind of two issues here. The first is that it doesn't put any extra money in the different ministries or whatever. I also had this quote somewhere. Let's see whether I can find this. Oh yeah, because it's a bit striking. So it says, we will include the project described in the security strategy in the relevant ministerial budgets within the federal budget by means of prioritization, should funds not already have been allocated to them. Given the considerable demand on our public finances at present, we will strive to implement the strategy at no additional cost to the overall federal budget. Understandable, because no one has extra money lying around. But if you set out to say, we are an important player in the world, we want to shape things, and then say, but we're going to do this with the existing funds, that's certainly problematic. And of course, this is the kind of, all areas but the hard security part, but there's also the hard security part, the Bundeswehr question. And here, in the security strategy, we do have the 2% goal mentioned. So Germany spending 2% of its GDP on defense, according to the NATO target. There is a commitment to it, although it is once again a bit muddled down by talking about a kind of multi-year average. So basically saying, we may not reach it now or next year, but eventually it's going to be 2% if you calculate it all together. But unfortunately, ever since the strategy, my belief in Germany actually spending that money on the Bundeswehr has actually gone down. Now, we do hear a lot, including from the Chancellor, we do hear a lot of statements that the 2% will be reached. But when you look at the actual budget, and right now it's budget week in Germany, when you look at the actual budgets, you see that this money doesn't seem to materialize. And also importantly that, we have this 100 billion special fund, which helps to reach a higher kind of level of defense spending, but it is increasingly unclear what will come after this money runs out. And this is extremely problematic for industry. This is extremely problematic for, everybody. And I just can't see it's very striking because, I've actually looked into this quite a bit over the last week. And it is very striking because you have a big difference between the rhetoric of the government, Scholz, the SPD in general, who are really emphasizing that, yes, we will be spending this money and it's going to be there, and the actual numbers that we see. And I, for once, can't console these two things. So maybe they're going to find this money somewhere, but it doesn't look like it's there, and the strategy doesn't find it either. And then fourth observation. So because of my job, I've read a few national security strategies over the last few years, and especially those of France, the UK, the US, so partners and countries that are in similar situations as Germany. And I have to say, what struck me when I read the German strategy is that it kind of sounded quite similar to those. I don't mean by that they all say the same thing content-wise. Of course, there are different priorities, and of course, some countries emphasize one thing over another, no question about it. But just the overall tone, the overall kind of thinking, a kind of view, the kind of overall view of the world is quite similar. And when you think about it, that is actually somewhat surprising and striking. And I genuinely wonder whether that would have been the case had the strategy been written without the war in Ukraine or the attack on Ukraine having happened. What I mean by that is that over the last decades, basically ever since I've been working in this field, I've always seen and heard and read and experienced a kind of holier than thou, we are more enlightened than you approach from the German political realm on security and defense. So because of our history and because of all the things that we've learned from our discretions, we seem to believe that we've kind of we've yeah, we've been enlightened to a certain extent, and we have understood that military power isn't the answer, that geopolitical competition isn't the answer, and that, well, it's just the kind of mean, unenlightened people that look at the world this way. I'm, exaggerating, obviously, to make a point, but nevertheless, I think this is something that was quite present over the last decades in the German approach to security and defense questions. And I think this is slowly waning, simply because people have realized that, well, the world isn't as nice a place as we thought and hoped it would be and it would become. That military might and geopolitical might still matters. And so then just saying, can't we all get along, and can't we find solutions to our problems via international institutions and the United Nations and via trade, just doesn't work anymore. And so basically, I think there's a bit of a kind of realist turn here in the thinking in Berlin, which you can read in the strategy. And again, it's something that you may not necessarily realize immediately, because it doesn't say we've changed our view. I'm just saying the fact that the strategy reads not so dissimilar from strategies in other countries is something that may not have been the case in a kind of parallel world where the war in Ukraine would not have happened. That, of course, is my reading, and I could be wrong. All right. Looking at the time, well, it basically took exactly the 20 minutes. So I figure, so maybe we stop here. I did kind of write down a few notes on the view of China and on the view of France and things like that that I can share. Oh yeah, I just wanted to end this whole thing with one final point, and that is, again, for the Brits that are watching, or the Brits that or the people interested in German-British relationships. The United Kingdom is not mentioned in this document once, and that also not an oversight. So I actually sat down and counted. I mean, with the help of my computer, but still. And it's not as if this strategy mentions a lot of countries. That's also, deliberate. But it does mention France 5 times, and it does mention the United States 3 times. So kind of the 2 most important partners. But that's it. It does mention the European Union 80 times. So, you can see I kind of focus here. But yeah, so the United Kingdom isn't mentioned. I think that is a kind of nod to Brexit, saying, well, there we are. Yeah, that's where we are on that. And I'm happy to discuss all of those. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. I just take over and congratulate you on your reading. I think it's very close to mine, I must say. Maybe I sort of start off with very short summary. They will overlap with yours, and maybe make a few comments on your 4 points. I totally agree. It's sort of, or I may be even a little more critical than you. I think it's it's not a strategy. I think we have to say it is more like a sort of collection of goodwill, goodwilling intentions, how Germany wants to go about in the world. And we have no priorities. And that sort of is, I think it's necessary for a strategy to say at least what are the main things you want to do, rather than listing 75 things you would like to do all at once, which is and that's the second point. No money. Ulrike has pointed that out. Is a little sort of surprising to put it mildly. And sort of how should we go about achieving all these things if we don't spend more money on it? And then the Zeitenwende. Indeed, it is sort of, as Ulrike rightly says, sort of the idea to have a national security strategy was born before Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, and has sort of then infused this process. And I think the overall intention was very laudable on the part of the new government to try for the first time really to define where Germany is in the world. It has sort of, as Ulrike said, there were various other attempts to do that, more specifically in the defense and security field with white papers and so on. But this kind of all-encompassing effort is certainly a good thing. But to me, it was a bit of a mischance, because at this third point, the Zeitenwende, this sort of the immediate reaction of Germany to this brutal war Russia is waging in Ukraine for 560 days and counting, is the background of the national security strategy, but it isn't really addressed. So it is sort of and yes, if you read it sort of closely, as Ulrike did, you can say there's this kind of new realism now in Berlin. That's this kind of Wunschdenken, this sort of to think about the world the way we would like it rather than the way it is. That is sort of on the way out, but still this kind of reluctance on the German part to really draw all the conclusions from that. So in a way, the paper speaks a little bit, to my mind at least, that we would like to continue the way we used to, but only we do it in a better way. And that is sort of, I think, highly problematic since the world around us is changing rapidly. And so the big problem is that this national security strategy might be a good first effort, but it's certainly not a sort of encompassing answer to how Germany can keep up with the high change and the high demands which are now sort of really sort of weighing down on Germany and German foreign and security policy. On the 4 points, as I said, agree very much. This encompassing or this idea to have security defined in the broadest possible sense was of course an idea also of Baerbock's to try to generate as much support for it as possible. And this had the downside of extending the period of time it took to put it all together quite considerably, because Baerbock sort of came in as a new minister and sort of wanted to make this strategy her own, and then sort of went about to think about what is all sort of relevant for security, and then she sort of started to trespass on the green of other ministries, including civil catastrophe. Well, the response to a catastrophe. Which is sort of the domain of our home offices on the national, on the regional level, and it became really complicated. And people asked why is the Foreign Office interested in how they sort of I don't know how a local emergency response would look like in the case of a major flooding in say Bavaria. So that is sort of that was the complicating thing. But you, as Ulrike said, sort of you can also see the bright side of it. And the idea was to make the German public at large think how many things are really sort of relevant to our security. But I think that was maybe not no longer necessary once Russian troops were in Ukraine, and maybe that also sort of was a bit sort of overdone. And yes, focus is moving from the EU to NATO when it comes to security. When Scholz came into office, there was talk about Germany sort of funding the almost mythical now European response force of 5,000 people, sort of with a German with a headquarters financed by Germany. So we haven't heard of that recently, and I think it's sort of quietly shelved. And indeed, hard security questions are now sort of mainly thought about in the NATO context. No money, absolutely. My theory is how we will meet the 2%. We won't meet it. We haven't met it last year. We won't meet it this year. We will actually meet it next year and the year after, and possibly in 2026 as well. But then we won't, according to current planning. And so we have two options. And Finance Minister Lindner recently said that he wants. Well, then of course the regular budget would need to topped up by 30 billion. Or that's sort of addressing also a question in the chat already from Andreas Quelle, and that is very unlikely in political terms. I mean, how could it and that is the tricky thing is that it's probably not him if we have a change of government by the next election. The sort of what they do actually is sort of turfing this question to the next legislative period. So this would be one option to have this huge jump from 50, speaking roughly, to 50 to 80 or 90 billion, or to have a second special fund. And my theory is that maybe this sort of to agree in another Sondervermögen, another special fund for the armed forces, maybe actually be the more realistic one. But still, we would then have two budgets. And a very sort of roundabout way to meet the 2%. And you still have the impression from seeing the government and the three parties who carry it, talking about the 2% and so on, and military spending, that there's still some reluctance the chancellor is committed, he can't go back, but the rest of the government sort of always seem to be on the lookout for some wiggle room to somehow sort of qualify it and make a sort of soften this very hard goal. And I think it's not only for Germany itself, but also looking at the transatlantic relationship, it is absolutely fundamentally important that Germany meets this goal as soon as possible and in the long run. And heuristic turn. I think maybe Ulrike is more optimistic than I am. I still sort of German society, German politics don't like change. They're sort of really hard to get it going. We have very interesting sort of initiatives. The Munich Security Conference is sort of carrying out a Zeitenwende on tour discussion all across Germany. This is certainly something new and something refreshing. Sort of at our magazine, of course, we also sort of try to make the case or have the discussion about a more active, a more sort of more resilient, a more Germany is more capable of defending itself and its allies. That this is a good aim to have and to pursue in a coordinated fashion. And I think that this is not the sort of this enjoys large support. Maybe even the public is a little ahead of the government at some points, but it's still sort of slow going. And maybe this sort of somehow inconclusive national strategy is an expression of this hesitancy which we still see in Germany. And with that, I play the ball back to Ulrike or to Tamara, or maybe to you if you've got questions or comments.
Yeah, maybe while we sort this out. So I only see one question in the Q&A, which I'll read in a second, but maybe just to kind of respond to a few things. So just something that I wanted to mention for those who don't spend their time reading national security strategies, the British national security strategy, or indeed integrated review, is also quite big on the looking at security through a broad lens camp. So it's called integrated review because it tries to be integrative and look and put everything together. So just as a kind of point of information for those who aren't aware, because I think there's a little bit of a trend going on with regard to that among the Western partners. Henning, I very much agree with your point on the kind of funding, and as I was saying, so since I can't consolidate the fact that they keep saying that the money will be found and the money doesn't seem to be there. I also wonder whether in the end we're going to end up with another special fund or something like that. The thing is, especially industry, and we've been talking a lot about the defense industry lately, they don't just need money. They need to know whether or not there will be money in the future, because we're not talking about, stuff that you produce in like half a year. We're talking about really kind of long-term planning things. We're talking about, whether or not you're going to build a construction chamber or another firm somewhere. And so I really worry that we may end up in a situation where in the end, you kind of looking back, you can say, but we always had the money that we needed, and why did nothing happen? And the answer will be, well, because we were never really sure whether we would have the money that we needed, and so no one really wanted to take a risk. This is something I really worry about, and this whole idea of Planungssicherheit, like the security of actually knowing that if you jump now, there will be water in the pool. I don't think it's there. Now, there's a whole thing to be said about the kind of relationship between the German state and the government and the German defense industry. So I don't know whether we want to get into this. I think there are kind of trust issues on both sides, if you like. But yeah, this is the main thing I worry about with regard to the money. So it's not just that you need to find the money somewhere, but also that it's much better if you can make commitments, and this government isn't making commitments. And yeah, just on the kind of realist bit. I mean, and the German society, of course, is also another question. But I think that the thing I've experienced is that this kind of hubris is a little bit gone. I was always struck, and I wrote a piece about this over 2 years ago on, I mean, at this point I kind of called it the millennial mindset, but it was very much a kind of German mindset. I've always been struck by this approach that somehow we're just, more enlightened than everybody else, and we have understood that, war isn't the answer. And, I'm exaggerating, of course, but I think that there was this feeling, and I think at least the hubris of this is gone. It doesn't mean that some of the core beliefs are still there, and it doesn't mean that we've kind of turned around here completely, but at least we learned the hard way that, military power is needed for something. Luckily, we, and more importantly others, still have some military power that we could send to Ukraine to help them defend each other. So I think we have become, and rightly so, a little bit more humble on these issues, and that's already that, I guess. Oh, and there are questions in the Q&A. I don't know, Tamara, do you want us to just do them ourselves?
Yes, if you could, that would be great. Thank you.
I actually do have a question here about China, and I did write down 2 sentences on China, so maybe I can go on to talk about China, and Henning, you can jump in and tell me how you felt about that. So basically, I kind of, China is obviously mentioned in there quite a bit, and I felt that the government was really trying to kind of walk this tightrope between the United States' decoupling approach and kind of United States' approach of saying, China is the main competitor and proponent, and we need to decouple and have a consolidated Western approach to that, and the kind of more business-friendly cooperative approach. I think the German government does care about not alienating China too much for kind of 3 reasons. The first is the kind of more classic business economic case, and it is an important market. The German car industry depends on it, all of that. Sure, true, but it's just one of the reasons. The second reason is that Germany very much feels it needs to be able to work with China on issues that are crucially important, and the number one and basically the only thing is climate change. And there's really this feeling that we can't alienate the biggest polluter. Is it the biggest polluter now? I think it is. Anyway, I think the biggest country in the world on that, and we really need to be able to work together. And the third reason is that I think Berlin really worries about self-fulfilling prophecies, and I get that. That if the West really takes on the kind of US approach of saying, yes, this is the main competitor, then you kind of create even more of a competition. Now, of course, there are those that say that's just reality and you may as well accept it, but I can see this kind of fear about the self-fulfilling prophecy. So all that being said, it means that the strategy is kind of doing both. They are reasonably outspoken on China. They do say we see that elements of rivalry and competition have increased. There's another formulation, another phrase that I didn't print out that was even stronger on kind of China is pressuring other countries and trying to take on control or something like that in the region. So I think it is quite critical on that, and that is unsurprising given that especially the Greens and the Liberals even before the election were relatively outspoken on these issues, but nevertheless, it also says China is a partner. So it says China is a partner, competitor, and systemic rival. The typical formulation that you see, not everywhere, but a lot of Western countries in the EU have been using. So yeah, it's a bit trying to do everything at the same time, which I find difficult to criticize. Like, of course, I can take on a very kind of security and defense position and say, no, we should be more outspoken on this, etc. But I do understand how the chancellor and the government also need to balance all these other concerns that I mentioned. So I find this relatively tricky. And I'm now going to admit that I haven't read the China strategy that came out since then, which was one of the strategies that was announced in this national security strategy. So I very much hope that Henning did and can tell us whether the China strategy kind of said, it was certainly more detailed, but whether it laid out anything much more concrete than that.
Yes, indeed. Germany's foreign policy sort of had a sort of a party of papers. We started off earlier this year with guidelines on a feminist foreign policy. Then we've got the NSS, which we're talking about today, which was followed by the China strategy, which came out in early July. And it's yet another very detailed document, the China strategy, I think, again, about 60, 70 pages. And it's sort of, to try to put it in a nutshell, again, we have something which a sort of more ein nüchterner Blick, sort of a more sort of colder view of China. I think that's maybe is what this new strategy speaks of. It is very much aligned with EU thinking on that. As Ulrike mentioned, sort of we have this trias of partner, competitor, and systemic rival. That is the EU definition of China since, I think, 2019. This is sort of, it still pops up in German policy documents, including the China strategy, while it's now been added that the focus has moved quite a bit in recent years on this systemic rivalry. So this already sort of is a one big observation. Germany is changing its China approach, which was very naive during the Merkel years. I think everyone agrees on that, and also very sort of very in awe of China as an economic powerhouse. And this is now sort of more qualified, which I think is a good thing. And what the new strategy also is sort of focusing on is the de-risking narrative, which again comes from Brussels and from Ursula von der Leyen. So de-risk our relations with China. Scholz recently has said that's mainly the business of the companies involved, which is a bad signal insofar as it suggests that it's nothing to do with the German government. Of course it has. And you can see that there are certain differences in emphasis between, say, the Chancellery, which tends to be sort of more on the let's do business now as long as we can side, and the Foreign Office and the Economy Ministry, which is led by Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck, who are much more sort of, well, hawkish maybe is the wrong way of putting it, but they are certainly sort of they are also the ministries now sort of putting this, what does de-risking mean, into practice, or are at least are in the lead to formulating this kind of policies and ultimately laws, which will then sort of are supposed to lead to a sort of a more cautious, a more de-risked, a more matter of fact policy towards China. It is really that the China problem is for Germany. If you look at trade, for instance, I think 9% of our trade is with China. That's not that much. That's the same as the United States has. Other countries, Australia, for instance, I think has 40% of its trade with China. So trade-wise, Germany isn't that much exposed. But there are a number of companies which are sort of too big to fail in Germany, which are exposed to the China business. So if they would lose it, because I don't know, the People's Republic decides to invade Taiwan, then there's a big problem. And then it's sort of the underlying debate about sort of what happens then. Would Germany need to bail out these companies or not, and to what extent would it have to? These are the kind of issues which sort of are behind this sort of new thinking, and are not sort of there's no definite conclusion to all these questions which have been brought up now. But it's an ongoing process, and overall we are coming to a sort of harder line from Berlin if it comes to China. We saw that already when the Chinese government was in Berlin for government consultations. We will also see it, I think, in outbound investment screening, which used to be controversial. The Americans have now started to do it, and I think the EU also wants to have it, and Germany, I think, is supportive of that, even though the Chancellery sometimes signals that it's not so happy with it. But this approach of a small core-tie fence, outbound investment screening on technologies which are highly relevant to military application, this is in the works and would be probably unthinkable under Merkel. So you see this change has been really huge if you compare it to the previous government.
Yeah, so we have, I see at least two more questions in the chat. One is on the potential implications of a change in the US administration after 2024. And the other question is one about the Global South. It's a bit longer, so I'll read it out. Would it be fair to say that there is an increasingly divisive cultural divergence between the West and developing countries, and that this is something which Russia is taking full advantage of? Should the Western democracies be listening to the developing world countries and their concerns in this respect before it is too late and we are isolated with our views? There's a balance to be found. Henning, do you want to take either the United States or the Global South question?
I do the Global South, if I may. Then I leave the US administration for you. In part because the latest issue of our magazine, International Political Quarterly, was sort of focused on Europe and the Global South. And yesterday and the day before was the ambassadors conference in Berlin, where all the German ambassadors come together in Berlin and have a big discussion and talks and listen to speeches. And interestingly, the first day of that was dedicated to this interaction with countries of the Global South. Sort of how do we sort of reach out to them? How do we address their concerns? How do we actually make them sort of side with us in a more obvious way when it comes to Russia's breaking of international law? And that was the focus of day one of this conference. So it shows that in a way this is where German foreign policy thinking at the moment is. There's sort of this is one of the big questions they want to address this year and next. Sort of how to sort of be principled in the approach to support for the rules-based international order, while also sort of trying to become a better listener and sort of be more responsive to what these countries want from the West, or why they don't like the West anymore. Someone told me that sort of the West is an unnerving feature for many of them. They're genervt. They're genervt from Western many of the developing countries, and one task of German foreign policy will now be sort of to de-nerve them, to find ways of making more attractive offers, and sort of peel them away from this sort of either them sitting on the fence when it comes to Russia and Russia's illegal war, or if they sort of if they are siding with Russia to get them sort of change their ways, basically. And so this is one thing which is will, I think, play a bigger role going forward. And whether a balance can be found, that is a good question. I think it also sort of depends on whether Germany will be able to do this in concert with its European partners in particular, but also with the United States, whether the West or the global West will be able to offer a convincing alternative, say, to the Belt and Road Initiative, and to really help countries building infrastructure, integrating them into the world economic system and so on. I think that's a big challenge, and Germany seems to be ready to play its part. Yeah, I think the ambition certainly is there.
Yeah, the ambition is there. And I mean, it really struck me how this was one of the consequences of the war in Ukraine, that many in the West kind of took note of the fact that there are a lot of countries in the rest of the world, and it really is more the rest of the world than the Global South, right? The Global South is just like this term that just kind of groups everybody who isn't the West and who isn't like China and Russia, right? So that there are many countries in the rest of the world that just have their own agendas and that don't see the Russian aggression of Ukraine in the same way that we do, for various reasons. And we can not agree with this. We can believe and argue that this is not in their interest to do that, but they have their own views. And so I think this was the kind of, to some extent, non-reaction of the Global South to the war in Ukraine was a little bit of a wake-up call. I mean, I say non-reaction. It's when you look at kind of United Nations votes on the war in Ukraine, you still have an overwhelming majority of countries that condemn the attack and all of that. But you do have important countries that do not, that abstain, that support Russia, or just say, we don't care, or basically tell the West, like, you never care when something is happening in our region of the world. Why should we care in yours? All of that. So this is something that has been discussed quite a bit over the last months. And so I'm not surprised that also International Politik Quarterly has been looking into this. I think it was particularly striking at the Munich Security Conference as well in February. This was a big topic there as well. And the one thing I wanted to add, I feel in your question, the person who asked the question, there's a bit, it says about increasingly divisive cultural divergence. I don't actually think that this is any kind of division that is growing, or that really is cultural. I think what's happening is that once we, i.e. the West, is realizing, as I was saying, that other countries have other views on things, and two, there are several countries, actually a lot of countries, that are just slowly, or actually quite quickly, gaining in importance and power on the world stage, while relatively speaking, the West is losing. And I think this is really, countries are realizing that, they're not just any random country anymore. They really matter. And it's particularly, of course, the case for like the BRICS countries, but other, Indonesia or Nigeria, or, there are countries that are really growing quite a lot demographically and economically, and therefore just have another level of power on the international stage. So they also are just becoming more outspoken, and they realize that in this kind of global competition between China and the US, or China and the West, or however you want to frame it, there are things to be gained. And my view actually is that a lot of countries will be very comfortable with kind of fence sitting, or rather kind of playing one out against the other. I don't necessarily think we're going to see the kind of the kind of Cold War situation where you put countries into different camps. I mean, a few will be there, but I think a lot of countries will just going to say, we're going to follow our interests, and where it suits our interests, we're going to try and work with one side and then benefit from the other sides giving us things. So I think this can continue. On the United States and the kind of change in the administration, I mean, of course, the way the question is framed, what are the potential implications for the national security strategy of a change in the US administration after 2024? There's, the national security strategy is obviously, I mean, this document won't be changing. Obviously it depends on the change in the US administration, but I think the question is asking, what happens if Trump comes back, or someone similar or worse? I think there's only so much you can prepare for this. I think like last time, Germany and the other Western allies will try to kind of hold it together and keep especially NATO alive. I think the biggest concern, kind of immediate concern, is the US under Trump leaving NATO, which, as far as we know, absolutely was a possibility and might happen or might not happen. No one really knows with him. I think what Germany and the other Europeans are trying to do is, to put their house a little bit more in order, kind of strengthen European capabilities, be it the European pillar of NATO, or kind of more kind of independent European capabilities. I'm very much in the camp of saying, let's just strengthen our capabilities. It's one set of forces. They're going to serve the European pillar of NATO or any kind of EU effort. So let's not kind of bump heads over that and just build up capabilities. But I don't think there's a great answer to that. We hope it's not going to happen. We try to build up our own capabilities as much as possible, but I think Europe will really struggle if the US becomes isolationist, if they become as erratic as they were under Trump, if they leave NATO, if they stop the support of Ukraine. I think that's a big one. I think the US was incredibly important in coordinating the Western response to Ukraine. If you look at the actual numbers, the UK, Germany, these two countries in particular, as well as other countries, are doing a lot to support Ukraine. So it's not as if it's just the US and then anyone else. But coordination-wise, politically speaking, had the US positioned itself differently, I don't think the Europeans would have come together as clearly and as united to support Ukraine. So if that changes, that could be really problematic too. I don't have a great answer as to yeah, we don't quite know how this is going to play out. I think there's a lot of hope just involved that this will not happen. But let's be honest, I mean, all these efforts of European strategic autonomy, European sovereignty, et cetera, many of them were really also born out of the kind of Trump shock. I mean, either before he was elected or once he was elected, but this does play a role. The fact that we realize that the US may not always play the role that it is playing under a very pro-transatlantic president like President Biden. Yeah, so let's hope. I guess the Europeans can pretty much come together and say, let's hope it's not Trump. But there are also other options that are not great for Europe security-wise.
And maybe just adding on that, it's noticeable that Chancellor Olaf Scholz has a very good personal relationship with President Biden. They sort of clicked the first visit Scholz made to the White House, and he has also sort of even demanded that the US sort of taking the lead in key decisions or things which he thinks are key decisions, especially when it came to delivering Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Scholz sort of made this decision, this German support, dependent on the US also committing to sending their main battle tanks. And we have the same situation now when it comes to the, I think the German missiles called the Taurus sort of missiles, when the German administration or Scholz particularly seems to be insisting that the Americans need to send the ATACMSs first. Ulrike is much better in military acronyms than I apologize. But the point I'm trying to make is sort of the Scholz government is very much looking to Washington when it comes to strategic leadership. Big difference to the UK under its previous three prime ministers, where Britain has always sort of gone ahead. Challenger tanks were sort of committed early, also to make the Germans move. And the equivalent to the Taurus missile are already in action in Ukraine and have been so since May. So that is a big difference. And if this sort of kind of strategic leadership by the US is sort of all of a sudden missing because we have Trump back in the White House, then we are in a very sort of in a situation which will be really challenging for this government and any government, I would imagine. And then we will hear more criticism from Paris, I'm sure, why this Zeitenwende and the Germans sort of finally getting serious in foreign and security policy sort of are lacking this European dimension. So this then would be the twin issues there. So a sharp a political turn in the US would also sort of create frictions in Europe, and that's sort of in short my reading of that.
Yeah. I think generally we can't overestimate the importance of having the US as a kind of unifying force in Europe, which I find a little bit sad that that's needed, but it is needed, and you can definitely see over the last decades that it was needed, and you do wonder what happens if that disappears. We're gonna have more kind of criticism from Paris, I think, in the coming years. In any case, having been quite involved in kind of German-British relations over the last years, and thinking like, oh God, this is so difficult. Let's just go back to the continent. Now I gotta say, French-German relations on defense aren't exactly that much more fun either. So there you go. And I think we've come to the end of our time anyway. So I guess I hand over to Tamara.
Yeah, thank you so much to both our speakers. It was fantastic. I personally got many interesting insights, and I'm taking a lot with me today, and I hope our audience does as well. And I just wanted to mention we have a few more exciting events coming up in the coming weeks. So on the 13th of September, our members are invited to join us at the Houses of Parliament for a talk which is hosted by Stephen Hammond, for a talk with Dr. Philippa Whitford, who is the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Germany. On the 28th of September, we host our Oktoberfest at Steins in Kensington. And on the 8th of November, we have Asha Allen from the Center of Technology and Democracy here, who will be in discussion with Jessica Cecil, who is the founder of the BBC Trusted News Initiative, and Lutz Göhner, who is head of strategic communications at the European External Action Service. And we hope you join us for some of these events, and I am looking forward to seeing you then. And I wish you a nice rest of your day. And thank you very much again to our speakers. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the discussion as well.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.